There's still people joining, but it's 11 o'clock, so we'll get into it now. All right, so I'm just jumping into ClockOn here, so everyone should be aware of what ClockOn looks like. But what we're going to cover today is the end of financial year process within ClockOn itself. And then after that, also just a quick overview if there's anyone new to Single Touch Payroll and how to submit Single Touch Payroll using the Wizard. Sort of there'll be some tips and tricks in that and throughout. So I'm going to stick to the process of end of financial year within ClockOn, but by all means, please send through any questions. If there is anything, questions that I don't get to or I'm unsure of the answer as I'm not a payroll officer, I will take note of those on the chat. So please put them into the chat and we'll be able to follow up on that for any sort of ATO requests. We do have a bunch of links that we'll be able to send through on the group chat there for everybody. But on our websites, we do have a quick start guide for end of financial year. So if you do go to our knowledge base, so if you just need to click on the help button from anywhere within ClockOn, it'll bring it to a knowledge base article at the top. If you click on the home, under the getting started section, we do have some quick start guides and more are coming up. But at the bottom here, we've got an end of financial year one. And so I'm sort of going to be running through this particular guide for this session for the end of financial year. So you can either click on the image or there's a link there and that'll download a PDF with some other links to useful sections. It's got a bit of a checklist and all of that in there. So that's a useful one. Also, if you do just search up in here, end of financial year or EOFY, the end of financial year, PAYG Summaries, if you're still needing to run those, it has the step-by-step guides in that. Also, so coming into, and then for the Single Touch Payroll, people who were 20 employees or more for this financial year and they need to submit using Single Touch Payroll. Again, we've got some guides around that Single Touch Payroll. And if you come to our payroll section within the knowledge base, there's a whole section on Single Touch Payroll. So the main ones are going to be the submission one and the employee update, which I will cover in the moment. All right, so coming into end of financial year, the first bit is you need to process your last payroll of that year. So as per normal, just go into your payroll, enter into payroll. Now, as you close up to the end of financial year, you'll notice this process in new financial year tick box becomes available. So the idea of that is if your end of financial, your last payroll finishes sort of in that last week or last fortnight of the financial year, but you're going to be paying the dollar figure to your employees in the next financial year, then tick this process in new financial year. And that means the figures from this payroll, even though it's sitting in the current financial year, those figures will be dropped into the next financial year ready to go for that one, because that's when you're making the payment. So it's up to you, I guess, where you need that to sit, but so that make sure it pays in the next financial year. If you've ticked it, it sort of goes a little bit funny here. So just tick the include all employees on and off, and you can get back into making sort of adjustments on that. I just sort of noticed that when I was checking that out before, that sometimes it gets locked in if you accidentally press that and run that. So let's say we run this in the financial year. Just going to go in there, check your payroll, everything as per normal. When you're going through your payroll, I've just auto-generated all of my timesheets in here. We go next, process the payroll. I don't know if people have used this before, but there's a global message that you can enter into the pay slips. So if you enter that on that global message, it will go out to all your employees on their pay slips. Might be, last payroll of the financial year or something like that. And when we press process, it processes that payroll. And for everybody who is currently using Single Touch Payroll, if they can, everyone who's using Single Touch Payroll now, once that payroll processes, you just need to continue, just submit that last payroll as you would normally. So at the end of the payroll screen, we do have this Single Touch Payroll Wizard. And in this case, it's just a normal payroll submission. Now, I've got my Single Touch Payroll set to manual because I don't have a gateway for training set up, but the steps are the same, except other than uploading to the ATO in manual, it saves the files that I can then use for a gateway provider of my choice. So you would select your last payroll that you've processed within ClockOn. Click Next. It'll do all its usual checks, ready for the Single Touch Payroll. And then once that's done, we can submit that and that'll upload to the ATO. So like I said, this one hasn't uploaded. It's just generated a file here that I can use if I was using an external gateway provider. Okay, so that's processing your last payroll in ClockOn, just through the system. If you don't use this Single Touch Payroll from the last payroll window, you can come to the Payroll tab and use the Single Touch Payroll Wizard from here. That's perfectly fine. Now you just want to, just to make sure that the next steps are, I guess, straightforward and smooth and you don't have too many errors showing up, there's just a couple of little checks which are quite useful to do. So the first one is just double check your location details. So if we go to setup and jump into the locations, we just want to make sure that we've got the correct ABN for the company location. So I'm just dealing with location 1 at the moment. If you have had an ABN change mid-year, please do not change an ABN on a location. There are steps, and if you do need to do an ABN change, then please email support@clockon.com.au and we can help do that for you. Changing this right now will cause all sorts of mess from earlier different ABN. The other things you want to make sure you've got correct is just the location name, which is just the information of what the site is called. You want to make sure the company name is the trading name of the company. There, the contact details, we do need a name, street address, and phone number in this field. So for those in the past who have used ClockOn, that's the information that goes on the PAYG summary about the company. It also does get uploaded in Single Touch Payroll for the company owner, business owner there. So you need to make sure those details are correct. The other thing is, if you've sort of jumped on board needing to submit Single Touch Payroll and you were 20 and above and you need to be submitting it this year, you can run that final payroll and it will upload all that information. At the moment, the ATO being the first year of Single Touch Payroll is a little bit lenient on when those figures get sent through. So that is perfectly fine to sort of get that submitted sort of right at the end. Hopefully you have been doing it over the year, which will make life a lot easier. But if you do have 20 or more employees, this Single Touch Payroll Enable button was going to be turned on automatically for your location. And I'll get a bit more on that later on when we get to the Single Touch Payroll stuff. So that's the information about the location details. You just want to make sure are correct. The other one is on your employee details. It's a good time to sort of clean a few things up. So a good thing, if you are sending out your emailing out PAYG summaries to everyone, you obviously want to make sure everyone has their correct email addresses in there. So it's good to just do a quick refresh and clean up of everyone's emails addresses. If anyone is using the web portal or the ClockOn Go app, now's the time to take advantage of the employees editing their own details in there. So within the ClockOn Go app, if they go to the profile section, provided the security roles are turned on, you tick the edit button and they will be able to update their email address. And if they log into the web portal under the details section, they will be able to, if that has been enabled, they'll be able to edit and update their email information. So put a bit of that load back on your employees to make sure they got their right email set up there. The other thing you need to make sure, obviously, is that the tax file number is a valid tax file number. We have sort of discovered that if you're using one of the placeholder ones, like the 111, 333, and I think 999 is another placeholder tax file number, it's not going to create a payment or an income statement within their MyGov account. So you want to make sure that you are using the correct tax file number here. And the other thing, if you've got anyone who's got reportable fringe benefits amounts that you've been calculating throughout the year, so sort of a bit of a manual step, but you need to come into the year to date box here, and under the RFBA is the figure amount that you can enter in for that reportable fringe benefits amount. So just enter that information there. And you don't want to modify anything else in these year-to-date figures. If you need to do adjustments, we do strongly recommend running that through a payroll using allowances and deductions to do the adjustments. So I'll briefly touch that as well when we get to sort of the reconcile section. So there's sort of the main things that you need covered with employee details and the location details when you enter into the new financial year and getting ready for running those reports. All right, so when it comes to, I guess, reconciling your figures, you know, there's always questions around what are the good reports that need to be run. And so under the reports, I've added a few in the favorites. For here of the most, I guess the common ones that our managed payroll team use to help balance the figures, the figures ready for end of financial year for your employees. So under the payroll reports and the PAYG summaries, there is a year-to-date adjustment report here. So that is just, you can quickly jump to in the view, go to payroll reports, PAYG, and then using the year-to-date adjustment one means it will show up on the figures if you've run any year-to-date adjustments through the allowances within a payroll. And so that's one quite useful report to have. And I've just ran a few earlier on the figures that I've got here. So you can see this is the year-to-date adjustment. So it's going to give you your gross wages or your total gross here and your total tax, which is going to be sort of the main ones that you're going to need in checking against the PAYG summaries. The other one is running for some allowances and deductions. So in here, if you go to your payroll reports, under the payroll summaries, a useful one is running the allowances and deductions roll-up. Now on this particular one, if we just double click, we come in to filter. So any of these sort of end of financial year reports that you're wanting to run, just in the period, we do have a selection that's got financial year to date. And so, and just double check the years, the correct ones. And we click load, and that will load all of the pay periods into the report to check. And for this allowances and deductions, it does show every single allowance deduction that gets run for employees within payroll. So you want to turn off any of them that were set up that aren't in your allowances field. So anything that's not being allocated to a gross wage, you want to turn on, leave on and turn all the others off. So pay disbursements, I don't care about. Leave loading stuff, I don't care about. You may have other allowances that are included in the gross wages. Don't worry about them. It's only the ones that you know need to sit in the allowance section in the PAYG summaries or the income statement there for the ATO. So I've just left the clothing allowance and also the super salary sacrifice one because it's a good one to see those figures so you can match up the RSEC reporting as well. And then I'll just click preview and it'll run that. So it's going to show the breakdown of each location that you run that report for, the employee's name, what the allowance was called, and whether it's a before or after tax adjustment, and where it sits. Is it before tax, after tax? So that information. So you'll be able to use this figure here to help balance in the PAYG summaries to make sure that what you're reporting is what's been processed within ClockOn. And also the other useful one is the superannuation fund summary and payments type, because you're going to need to deal with that also at the end of financial year. So again, that's a payroll report under superannuation. And here we've got the payment type on that. So I've already sort of run that one. And this will give a breakdown of per fund and the employees within that fund. The super first column there is the column that is the employer contribution. The salary sacrifice or any allowances that need to be reported as reportable employee contributions. The RSEC information and any co-contributions as well, you can reconcile that information for. So they're sort of the three reports in the ClockOn reports that'll help you double check and make sure everything that you're running in your PAYG summaries that you're going to be submitting is correct. And so print out and save those reports. Oh, and I should have said, for those of you, I don't know how many of you, with the summary for the super reports, you'll just need to make sure you tick all of the months that you need to run that report for. If we click preview, this will run this report. And for those that may be new to ClockOn, when you're looking at a print preview, in the top left-hand corner, there's a print button. You can choose to print to your default printer, or we do have a print to file function where in here you can print it to a PDF or even to an Excel spreadsheet if you need to. We can save on paper, help the environment. Click on this three little dots and it'll give you the location on your computer where you want to save that information, and that will then save that report as a PDF if you don't want to print that out onto paper or have it stored somewhere else for the future. So once you've got a copy of those reports, we can then come into the payroll reports and we can just run the PAYG summaries. So clicking on the PAYG summary, we just want to make sure we're running it for a particular location, end of financial year. I'm not going to get too in depth in this one when you first run it. This is really to help balance your figures and make sure, you know, what just checking everything. So we can just click next. If you've missed any information with the business details, that's all here. We can go next again, contact details again, but these will all be already correct because we just briefly checked those earlier. When we click next again, now on this particular page where it says consider to rebuild year-to-date figures, now if you've made, other than the fringe benefits tax, or the fringe benefits amount that you've added on that year-to-date box, if you've made any adjustments in that year-to-date button for any employee, it's going to let you know that there's a difference between what is on their year-to-date figures and what has been processed in payroll. So there'll be a discrepancy between the two. So currently, if I was to just click next and ignore these, it would look at what is in the year-to-date box. So if there's any things that I've manually typed in, it's going to use those figures. If I've typed things in and I'm not sure and I want to use what's been processed through the payroll, then you need to tick the box and rebuild. And that's going to update that year-to-date box using the information, essentially the information that has come through on these PAYG summaries. So This employee one, I made some adjustments with an allowance on here. And employee 4, I've pretty much just deleted all of the figures on that year-to-date button. So I'm not going to worry about the rebuild just in this case for this one, because I've sort of done that for later on. But yeah, so the rebuild means use the payslip information, leaving it, and when it says rebuild reset balances, it's using manual adjustments that you've typed into the year-to-date button. When we click next, so in here it needs to calculate the reportable super, so any super salary sacrifices. So at the moment it's all zeros. Just make sure you click that calculate button, and it's then going to give us the figure of the reportable super that needs to be added separately on the PAYG summaries. Now, when you're submitting Single Touch Payroll, it does that calculation at the end of each payroll. So it is getting done there. How it was set up previously is it didn't actually calculate where that reportable super had to go until at this point. Then when we click next, if you've got any employees that work over multiple sites, then and they're on the same ABN, it will group them together. So you'll see aggregate buttons turned on, tick boxes turned on, if there's 2 of the same employees. So you've only got the one PAYG being submitted. Now, employee 4, that was the person that I zeroed out all the figures. So actually, I don't want to look at his PAYG summary, so it's not included in what I'm about to print. Click next. We can just save this step for wherever we need to. We're not going to run this report at this point. This is for generating the EMPDUPE file to upload up to the ATO, and that's only required the next sort of step if you're not submitting with Single Touch Payroll. So if you're using Single Touch Payroll, you no longer need to submit the EMPDUPE file to the ATO. So we can click next, and then on this final step, we can print a copy of the payment summaries. And so if we just do all, it would then calculate, and again, we can use the printout here. So then we can use those previous reports that we printed out. We can print out these PAYG summaries, and we can make sure that we've got the right, gross payments, the right tax, the allowances are there that need to be the allowances on all of that. And for anyone who's got the reportable super, just searching here, that reportable super amount will show up here also. So you'll be able to use those reports to check. So, and then if you need to, if there's any early termination payments that have occurred during the year, you can also print those reports. I don't have any in this sample data here. And so at this point, we can just go back and just cancel out of that, and then you can reconcile what you need to do. So if you do need to do some payroll adjustments, and there might be all sorts out there, so if they're quite difficult or you're unsure, please email through to support@clockon.com.au and let us know what you need to do, and our team will be able to help you, either send you some instructions or potentially log in there with you and help you through that. But if you do need to create, do some form of year-to-date adjustment, and that might be, I've got a whole heap of allowances that I've put through as a gross wage and they needed to be separated as allowances, or it could be a number of different things that you need to make those adjustments to. What you need to do is, if it's just for one employee, you can untick the include all employees, select that employee that you need to, and just edit the period. And so you might just want to edit the period for the whole financial year. And you want to make sure you tick the no entitlements payroll. So that just makes sure that when it enters into payroll, it's not going to accrue any leave. It'll just ask you, and it'll just put those people that you need to do those adjustments into their own payroll. And once that's complete, they'll then jump back in to the payroll period of the following one, ready to go for your next payroll. A couple of other things just to double check is you want to make sure in your employees, if any of those employees are auto-generating any timesheets, just temporarily turn that auto-generation off. Otherwise, when you enter into payroll, you're going to get a whole financial year's worth of pay slips get generated, and it's a real pain having to delete all of those. It's just an extra step that you don't want to do. So just make sure that if you are auto-generating any sorts of timesheets when you enter payroll, just turn those off. And so when we then jump into payroll, it's going to jump in for that period, and I just didn't listen to my own advice, and I'm generating all of those timesheets. So sorry about that. So you'll see that there's this massive gross hours amount in here. So I don't want those. So I'm just entering into the timesheets. I'm just selecting all here, and I will delete all of those timesheets. All right, so if you do need to make any sorts of adjustments, they're going to be done through the Allowances Manager for that person. And so we can add the allowance here. A couple of things you want to make sure you want to do, you want to change it to a per pay period when you're doing that. So it's not a weekly thing, calculating for that whole year. And when you process as, it's going to be some form of year-to-date adjustment. So whether it's a year-to-date before tax allowance or deduction, and it will depend on where you're moving the figures from and where you're moving it to. So you may need two, so it might be a before tax deduction to remove the figure out of your gross hours, and then it might be an after-tax allowance, or maybe even a before tax allowance, and you're needing it to move into the allowance section outside of the gross wages. So they'll all be some form of combination of that. Another useful thing to do is just tick the pay and next pay only, so it doesn't accidentally jump through the next time when you enter into payroll. Or also maybe just leave this as a fixed zero amount before tax. And then you can just type in the figure here to make those adjustments. So if you do put any of these year-to-date adjustments into your payroll here, when you do click on next, you should see zeros in here because you're not processing any wages through the system. It's in the background adjustment to that year-to-date table. So that's the best way to adjust the year-to-date figures there to balance your books there. That needs to happen. And I'll just cancel that for now. And again, you can then run those reports again using the PAYG summaries to rebalance out and make sure things are working in the right way. So once you've done all of that and you're happy with the figures, for those of you who have been using the Single Touch Payroll, you can, it's up to you, we haven't taken this function out, you can create those PAYG summaries and still email them out to your employees. There's nothing wrong with that. We've left that in there, and for this financial year, we're sort of seeing how everything lies and what people are going to need after the end of financial year. But in the strict terms of the Single Touch Payroll, those PAYG summaries are not needed to be sent to your employees anymore. All of their information is going to be in their MyGov account, and it's going to be sitting under their what's the terminology that they're using. It's going to be sitting under their employee statement, and it's going to let them know that they are tax ready once you run this final process in there. So to do that, we go to the STP Wizard, and in this case, we are using an employee update, and so we need to make sure we select the correct ABN for that, the correct year ending for that, and we want to tick the final payroll indicator. So that lets the ATO know that it has been processed, and then the employees will be marked as being tax ready. And so we click next. Just as a brief check, do you want to make sure that you're doing a final submission for that financial year? Yes, we do. You can do a quick check of the employees that you're wanting to do that submission for. If you need to uninclude anyone because you're needing to have a combination for whatever reason, you can turn on and off what you're doing in here. And we click next. It's doing all the appropriate calculations, and then you press submit, and then that will submit using the gateway. Flag in the ATO that has been done, and that's end of financial year done for those people who have been submitting single touch payroll. Now, if you happen to need to do another make an adjustment after you've submitted that end of financial year flag, you can still do that. Similar to how we did the adjustments, you can do another payroll in a previous period, so in the financial year that you need to make that adjustment for, and then just submit it. And by doing that, you can either use submit or employee update again. So if we come to the wizard, so you might need to run that back in the past, and you can resubmit a past submission. That's fine, or do another employee update with any changes. You don't need to tick this final indicator again. It's already flagged for that financial year that all of the submissions are ready for tax, but any adjustments will then just jump into that balance and update. I did find, and if you download that end of financial year quick guide, there is a couple of things that I did find on the ATO website. So you've got until the 14th of July to do the submissions of the single touch payroll. But if you, so you've got to the 14th of July to do that. But they are also, if you've reported, they're giving also a bit of a leeway additional to the 31st. So ongoing, it's the 14th of July. But for this end of financial year, you've got till the end of July to do that submission if need be. All right, so that's for the single touch payroll people. They're all done. If you are still needing to do the PAYG summaries to email out and generate that EMPDUPE file to upload up to the ATO, then we need to create the PAYG summaries. But it's useful just to run a quick validation before we sort of finalize all of that. Again, just check the location and the final, the financial year. If we click next, it's going to let you know if there's any sort of errors in there. A common one's going to be in here, group certificate invalid. On that, if we double click, it will bring up the area where the error is in there, and this is just because I've zeroed everything out. So they haven't worked in this financial year, so there's no figures there for it to go through, which is why it's getting that particular error on the screen. Sorry, I just had an email there. How can we check the actual information received by the so the information received, if it's been received, under our message center, under the Single Touch Payroll jobs, if you just click all, it will do the submission reports that has been received by the ATO. There is no, ATO isn't showing a business portal that is giving, this is what you've submitted for everybody. Each person needs to check their own MyGov account. So they will need to sign up to a MyGov account, or if they are going through their accountant, those figures will then come down with their accountant into their end of financial year tax. So the information that is sent to the ATO for Single Touch Payroll is the gross wages, any tax withheld, and the super amounts within ClockOn. So running those reports, the PAYG summary reports and the super reports, that's the information that we are passing on to the ATO. Also running that PAYG summaries, that's the information we're passing on to the ATO. That's what they've asked for to go up there, and we are compliant with all of that. If you have had an issue with anything being sent, I'll just need to open up messages here. So if I scroll down, you may get some messages in here. There's been an update and an error and on that particular submission. And so that's the information that we get sent from the gateway provider. So with the Single Touch Payroll, it submits to the gateway provider, and then that then gets passed to the ATO. If they get an error back from the ATO for some reason, it will send back. And that's normally if there's an error with the file itself. Other than that, it's just going to send those figures, and yeah, the employees need to have a look in their MyGov account and register to check those out. But the best way to see what are the figures you've sent is to run those PAYG summaries. And so once you've done the validation of the PAYG summaries here, we now can create, so it's the same process that we've done in doing our reconciling. So if we go next, add all of that information, that should all be good here. If we need to do any rebuilds, we can do that from here. Again, don't forget to click the calculate button here to make sure the correct reportable super is being generated. And then we're going to see who's included in the generation of the PAYG summaries. And then this is the file location that you can choose of where the file that needs to be uploaded to the ATO is. So you can just click on the folder here and choose the location of where you want to save that. Click next, and again you can print out all of these PAYG summaries, or from here at this point, because you've sort of checked them all and you're happy with them, you can actually email out all of the PAYG summaries to everybody. And we just click the send. I don't have any email addresses here in this one, so I'm not going to do that, but just click the send function and each employee will get a copy of their PAYG. And then we click finish, and we can then go to the file location of where that EMPDUPE file is, and then log into your ATO portals where you need to upload those files, and that is then submitted for the end of financial year on that. On that question as well, sorry, Lauren, I missed the bit where you've got a mismatch of information on what's been submitted and what's reporting in ClockOn. I might need to follow that up with support later on that to see if there may have been a a payroll missed potentially, or there might have been an issue. Yeah, there could be multiple sorts of issues on that. So we'll need to run that by support to double check that one there. If it is a case where you need to just amend one person and do an adjustment outside of payroll, you can do an employee update, which is just going to send a re-update of their year-to-date figures as well, just for that one particular employee also. Okay, so for Single Touch Payroll, for those of you who are now 20 and or 19 employees and under and needing to submit that, there is on our website that's been sent through, and emails will have been sent out with needing to register with ClockOn if you're wanting to use our gateway. Our team then makes sure that that gateway code is generated. It gets updated on your license, and when it gets sent out and the licensing is updated, you can then come into the setup and into the system setup. You'll be notified that it's been updated, and the AusEdi code, which is the gateway provider we use, has been created. And on the other tab, that information will be entered into this client ID section, and it'll show as AusEdi Gateway, and the ID will be here in there, and grayed out now because it'll be linked to the license itself. I've put a dummy code in there just so it was in there. And I'll just leave this as manual. So that will automatically be added. So just quick double check just to make sure you've got a client ID and that this is set to AusEdi Gateway. And then to enable it on your site. So for anyone that does have 20 employees or more, it's already enabled on all of those locations. But for the smaller ones, you'll need to jump into each location, come to the payments tab here, and just make sure this enable tick box is turned on. And so that tick box just allows the system to know that for this location, I'm going to start submitting Single Touch Payroll. The BMS method here is, it's really the ClockOn's ID for the ATO of submitting the Single Touch Payroll. So you won't need to change anything of that. For those of you who may leave us, hopefully you don't, and you do need to continue submitting Single Touch Payroll, obviously with the new provider, there's a couple of different methods in doing that. The recommended method is by zeroing out the year-to-date figures in ClockOn, and then adding them into your new system and submitting in the new system, or leaving them in ClockOn and then not bringing over year-to-date figures into your new system. This is the same for anyone new coming to us, and just uploading sort of the next lot of year-to-date figures, and that will add to the figures. Or you can submit with the year-to-date figures in the new system using the BMS information, but a lot of other companies aren't allowing, from what we've seen, ability to enter a custom BMS code there. So most of the time, this you just won't need to worry about. It's really just enabling it for each of your sites. And then on the Single Touch Payroll, so the ATO is wanting to make sure that at each pay event, they call it, so each payroll, that the pay data is submitted via the ATO, submitted to the ATO via Single Touch Payroll. And so what their recommended order is you run your payroll as per normal, you send out your pay slips and put the pays in the employees' banks as per normal, and then you submit that Single Touch Payroll to them after the pays have been sent to the banks. If you do need to make an adjustment sort of mid-pay period, you don't need to submit every single time. So just resubmit at the end of the next payroll, and that will get the latest year-to-date figures uploaded at that point. So if you've needed to do 5 adjustments between your payrolls, you don't need to submit all of those as single touch payroll submissions. You only need to do the one at the end of your next payroll to do that. In that, however, just be aware, at the moment we are keeping a list of the last 2 months of payrolls in here. So if you have run a few different payrolls before, like adjustments or amendments before the next payroll, just take note of what the payroll ID is of that last payroll, and you only need to submit that one. And that one will be the one that shows here. It's always showing the latest. This payroll replacement, if you're needing to run a replacement, is only if an error has come back from the submission of that file. And so, like I said, if you go into the message center, we can double check the status. Sorry, I can't, I'll zoom in a little bit. Sorry, I can't show this live in the ClockOn data because I'm not submitting, but you can check the in progress by clicking the status when you're in the message center, and it'll show that it's being submitted. If it's pushed or if it's all done, it will say successful. So you'll get a nice green one here saying it's successful. If you do get any errors in the system, and there'll be a number of different reasons why there might be an error, you can just expand down, double click, and you might be able to fix that briefly. But typically, if there's errors, log a case with support because that's potentially something going on with your data and not having the right information in the file. And so when that occurs and it gets resolved, that's when we do a payroll replacement. So that's just fixing errors. Most of the time, you're going to be just using that payroll submission. And then the employee update really is just if you've done a big year-to-date adjustment for one employee, potentially, or like I said, at the end of financial year, you just want to trigger the final payroll indicator that goes through. If you have needed to do a large amendment for a past one, so if you've, a couple of years, it happens from time to time, you need to amend it, then you can select the year that you need to and run the employee update. So that's the same way as generating an amendment EMPDUPE file for it. And because you've already submitted a final indicator for that financial year, then you're not going to need to retick that final indicator because that's already been flagged. So there was a question earlier about uniform payments showing at the ATO end. So how that works is it's with the allowances and deductions in there. So if we add it in here, if we call it uniform, however this is set up, it's normally set up with some sort of clothing-based dollar amount in here. You want to just make sure still this PAYG location is set to allowances, and that is going to show that it shows as a uniform payment at the ATO end as opposed to a part of their gross wages. So it's the same way of thinking of your normal PAYG summaries. Essentially, it's just a digital submission of that. So it's that same sort of thinking. I did have a link here, which I think Cherie has added to it there, the withholding of allowances for ATOs. So on that one, it tells you if you add laundry in that allowance, it's going to show it under laundry. For meal allowances, you want to have meals in there. So at the moment, this is sort of relatively new that they've sent out about these single touch payroll fields. So if we match these single touch payroll fields to the name, then they will go into the right locations online in that Single Touch Payroll. There is talk, and we're sort of waiting what happens after end of financial year, that we may lock down this name to be specific types of names, or they may be sort of different sort of templates that do that. But at the moment, it's not on any development map, but there is talk about needing to do that to become, just to make that whole Single Touch Payroll process a lot easier. A couple of other things for Single Touch Payroll for the compliance stuff is, as I mentioned before, all the employees need to have a valid tax file number in there. It needs to not be like all zeros, all ones, or all nines. Otherwise, it's not going to generate in their MyGov account. So you need to make sure that you update all of that. Also, when you're first running the Single Touch Payroll in the system, you will get shown a validation on there. So again, if you jump to our knowledge base with the Single Touch section, under here, if I got validation, sorry, I did do data validation. So you may get a pop-up with some error messages of what that information is, and you just need to double click on what that error message is, and it will jump you to the area. So that might be something like the tax file number isn't a correct valid tax file number. It might be that for a location you're missing the person's name on that, so you just need to add that name. So again, on those earlier steps where we were preparing our data for end of financial year, that's the same checks that you need to make sure that you're doing, and it does it in that first Single Touch Payroll one that you run, and each time it does a validation check. If there's any issues prior, because you've added a new employee and something's been missed, then they will show up there before every Single Touch Payroll submission. But if there's not, it's literally enter the wizard, select the pay period, click next, and then submit, and you're done with the Single Touch Payroll. Look, that's the steps. Please go and download that Quickstart guide. It does have a lot of links to our knowledge base. It's got a bit of a checklist on running that end of financial year stuff in there. If you've got any sort of questions at time, things aren't balancing correctly, please log a support request with our support team on that. We've got a couple minutes left. If anyone wants to unmute and chime in with a question, by all means feel free. But yeah, let us know. So that's all doing good. I ran in time this time, so that's fantastic. Thank you everybody for jumping in on the session. I really appreciate it, and I hope you got something useful out of that. Like I said, we will be just keep an eye on our social media, Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn. We will be doing our best to get this webinar up and live on our website a lot quicker. If you go to our website and check regularly, so just scroll down to the bottom and we do have a blog section. So there's all sorts of useful things within that blog on there, but the latest webinars will pop up here and you can click on that and it'll show you the videos of the webinars. In here on the categories side, you can just click webinars and it'll just show all of the webinars in there. Have a look around on our blog. It's relatively new, but we do have some useful calculators on there and some articles as well. If you could please, when we finish this, I will be sending out an email for feedback on this. So topics for the new financial year that you would like covered, please add them in. Let me know what you liked, what you didn't like. Cherie just added the link to the form, so I'd greatly appreciate any feedback whatsoever. Please be brutally honest, because it's the only way that I get any better at it and we get the valuable information through to you guys. So again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And if you've got further questions, either you can email through to support@clockon.com.au, or if you're wanting to book some training in on anything, please email education@clockon.com.au. Training is pretty much full before end of financial year, so send it through. You may slot in on a session, but it's likely to be sort of mid-July before we start picking up existing customer training again. So again, thank you very much and have a great day.